You get ready to do the next one there now. This is a horizontal stabilizer. I went and hung the lower door half up out of the way for now. And we've got this down, we'll start on it. Of course, the first thing to do on that is to wash it down with MEK and make sure it's absolutely clean. I've got to take these pins out here that I had put in it. These were hangers for painting when I painted it. Now, it looks like it'd be pretty straightforward because we've got one long side here, one straight side here, another straight side over here on this end, and a longer straight side on this end. But there's a curve here on the front edge of the horizontal stabilizer, so we'll have to kind of heat form that. Now, ideally, we'd use this straight section back here, since this is the rear of the horizontal stabilizer and out of the main impact of the slipstream and everything that's coming in on the airplane and stuff, that would make our seam back here. But because of the curve up there, we can't really make this, put a straight piece on that edge. You'd have to heat form it around, and then it's all going to get really twisted out of shape. So we have to wrap it around this side, this back side here, and then make the seam on the front side. Now, the recommendation on making a seam on the airplane is to make it on the side of the whatever surface that you're doing, to make it on the side that you don't look at as much. And normally on a Cub, the top surface would be the one most exposed to view because it's down low and that's the one you see most of the time. So you'd want to wrap, make your first layer on the bottom, bring it around here and tie it in, and then take the top layer and roll it over and make your seam on the lower side of that. But on the float plane it doesn't really make any difference because well, you never hardly get back to the elevators and the horizontal stabilizer anyway, but when you do, if we're going into a beach or something, it's just about chest level. So I suppose the top side would be most exposed, but when it's sitting on the ground on floats, you're looking up at it and you're looking up at the horizontal stabilizer. So the lower side would be the one the most visually exposed. So there's two of these horizontal stabilizers and they're both identical. They're both interchangeable. There's no difference between the right one and the left one or anything like that. So we'll do one with the seam on one side and one with the seam on the other side, and then we'll figure out where they go from there. We've got the tube sticking out here, and this is open on this end, and on that end down there, this is where it attaches. This is the inboard edge of the horizontal stabilizer, and this is where it attaches to the fuselage. Actually, it doesn't attach to the fuselage. The front one up there, there's the tube slides in it that goes through the what they call the link on the trim assembly. It raises it up and down, and then this one goes on another tube that goes through back in the tail structure, and it pivots on it. So those will be opened up, and I don't want to get a whole bunch of stuff inside those holes to make it any more difficult to get on and off those tubes. Down here is a pad, and that's a mount. You have the flying wires that attach here that go up to the top of the vertical fin, and then one that goes down and attaches onto a brace on the bottom of the fuselage. So flying wires go up and then down, but this is where they attach here. And because this is out in the slipstream and stuff and extended out, we also have to rib stitch these ribs on here. There's only 3 ribs and they're not very long, so that's not too big of a deal, but not for somebody that knows what they're doing anyway. For somebody, ham-handed guy like me, it is a big deal, but it's better than trying to stitch a wing anyway. I got this wiped down with MEK and it's really clean. You could feel it now. All of these controls were all powder coated. I bought them from Airframes Alaska, and they had them powder coated there. But when I was testing them with the MEK would soften up the powder coating, and one of the things in the polyfiber manual that any surface you have on there, you wipe it with MEK, and if it comes off any at all, then you should coat it with the polyfiber epoxy primer. It won't hold. Well, I did all the controls except I didn't do the door half, the lower door half. And so I just covered it, and when I'd wipe it down with MEK, I would get black off from it, but it didn't seem to soften. It would soften the paint and make it tacky, but I went ahead and put the Polytack and the cover on it and everything anyway, and it seems to hold up fine. So these probably would have been okay as they were, but they're painted, so it doesn't make any difference. And as I just went over with this with the MEK and wiped this clean, it doesn't come up with any color. It doesn't soften this primer up at all. And I've used this before on things as a sub base on it, and it's a really good primer sealer. It's pretty hard. It's pretty MEK proof, so it should work really well. Well, I got the fabric laid out here. Here's the horizontal stabilizer underneath it. I've got it wrapped around the rear section, the rear spar, whatever you want to call it, of this horizontal stabilizer, and then draped up over it. It's doubled over, so I've got one piece underneath and one piece on top. And I'm kind of parsimonious on this stuff. I can't just run down to the local dry goods store and buy some of this if I need it. Well, I kind of like to make it go as far as possible. But at the same time, I don't know if you can see that underneath there or not, but here's where that lower layer is, that lower part. You got to have enough on that to grab a hold of to heat form it around this tube. Well, if you don't, then you wind up with it too short, and then you got to start over again, so that's even more wasteful than having a little extra. I've moved this horizontal stabilizer down here towards the small end here, towards this, so I've got enough here to wrap over that end rib on both sides, and I've got more than enough on this end, so this will be cut off on this end. Cut along here on this end. Mark that there like that. Now I'm marking this where I'm going to cut it, is I'm going to smear some Polytack on these cut lines so that I can cut it, and that way it won't fray. It doesn't really matter too much on these because they're far enough away from the edges where they're going to be cut off anyway, but what the heck. I've got this container of Polytack here that I thinned down pretty thin with MEK, so it's not going to make a real thick run there. And I'm going to even use my little brush there that the hair comes out of, because I don't care here on this. I could make the thinner line if it was closer to something important, but it doesn't need to be. There's a hair coming out of that already. Well, I started freaking out for a second because things didn't quite line up when I laid that elevator back down on there after I cut it out, but I had it reversed. You would think that they would both be the same. You know, it's square patch, but it's not quite square. It's cut at an angle over here. And, so anyway, they didn't quite match up. So, but they do now. Now the next step on here is to relieve out where these bushings are for the pivot points where the elevators attach. And once those are relieved out, then this fabric can pull tight against this lower spar here, and then we can kind of glue it up to that to start with, and that's the starting point. Little slots for these bushings are cut out. Now I can get some Polytack and start gluing things down on here. I'll spread some on this rear bar first, I guess, like I said, and then start probably glue down this edge here first, and the other edge, and then we'll heat form the front, and then we'll go from there. I've got the fabric glued on pretty good to the back edge of this horizontal stabilizer. This stuff is working a lot better than that other fabric. I don't know why there's a difference in it, because it's exactly the same fabric, except this is the newer stuff I bought about a year ago to cover the airplane with, and the other stuff is from about 8 or 9 years ago that we redid the horizontal stabilizer and all the tail feathers with. But it's working a lot better. If my weakness with the poly brush is putting too much on at a time, or wanting to put too much on, my weakness with the poly tack here is not putting enough on. I finally could see, getting it on there thicker and then rubbing it down, getting it to come through that fabric, washing through there better. I cut off the back of the horizontal stabilizer and had it glued on before I went out for a stroll with the puppies. Now I've got these edge ribs here glued up, both the front, inside and the outside. Take a razor blade here and just trim this along here. I might let that poly tack set up just a little bit more before I get in there with any MEK. It's still pretty soft. And the next thing to do is to take the heat gun and just roll this up and glue this end on, and see it's got a lot of wrinkles and stuff on it. They don't want to fit too bad like that, but it's going to have a lot of wrinkles and stuff on it. Once it's heat formed, it's going to fit a whole lot better. So I'll let the poly tack set up just a little bit more on these rib pieces here. I'll pull this out so it's over the edge here a little bit so I can get under it. Okay, I think that's not too bad. I'm going to take this tube and mark it along in here so it goes down over that corner quite a ways, and then I'm going to cut it off. I'll put a little bit of poly tack on there and make a nice cut on that. This edge is all glued down, all done. Got the end ribs both glued up, so I'm going to let this set up for a while, and I'm going to take the little hobby iron and smooth this out. It's not too bad actually the way it is, but I'm going to smooth it out before I bring this piece over. And then we'll bring this piece over and glue it down to the end ribs, and then heat form it around here and take it over. I have to mark the other side 1 inch from this leading edge back like that, drape the fabric over, measure it out, mark it, cut it off, and then glue that down so it has an inch overlap. Going a lot easier than the door half did. This fabric here, the poly tack, is coming through it a lot better and sticking on a lot better. I took some time today and took the iron and rag with MEK and went over this leading edge and smoothed it all out and wiped off the excess MEK. Did the same thing on these sides, although they weren't too bad. And then I kind of overdid it where I was underdoing it with the glue before. I kind of overdid it and got a little bit too much in here on this main spar, and so I had to pull that back so that fabric doesn't roll over that edge and create kind of a dimple or divot in there. and I pulled that back and cleaned that up. I've taken this fabric and laid it over the front, and I kind of took the iron and rolled this edge over a little bit, just formed that edge a little bit. I'll take a pencil and mark this fabric here. Then I'll put a little bit of that thinned polytack on that edge and cut it so I have a nice clean cut on the edge there. And glue these ribs down on the sides, and then I can form this front and glue it down. So on the front, what I'll do is on the bottom, whatever side this is, I'll go over this a little bit with a heat gun and tighten this up just to 250, just preliminary, so we have a nice firm surface to glue to. And then we'll heat form this around here and then mark it an inch, cut this off and glue that down.